Welcome back to another episode of the Barron Report, where we are covering the latest news and topics to help your restaurant in this very big time of need during the coronavirus pandemic, and really kind of the impact it's having on the restaurant industry. And we're doing it through a series of not only operator interviews, but also interviews of experts around different topical areas. Today, I've got with me the CEO of Emerging, Matt Focht. Nice to have you on the show, Matt.
Great to be with you, Paul.
All right, so Matt, let's talk a little bit about Emerging first. Tell us a little about what you guys do in the restaurant space. How are you helping operators today?
Yeah, so Emerging works in many different facets. Our obviously goal is sustainable growth, and in times like today are tough. But we work in many different facets, real estate being a division, data science is a division, supply chain, and then we have a capital division. So ultimately, we're looking at many different facets of the business to make sure there's a long objective plan that, pretty much maximizes the revenues in a sustainable way.
Yeah, very cool. Real estate is one of the bigger topics that I get a chance to talk to hundreds of operators each week. And there are a lot of questions around PPP, but real estate, of course, is tied to one of those in terms of landlord leases, rents, et cetera. And I want to kind of explore that with you today. And that is really kind of understanding with this radical change that we're faced with in both the economy as well as just the pure shutdown aspect of our industry. As far as next best steps for an operator to take when it comes to negotiating and or getting some sort of relief from their landlords, what kind of things are you seeing in the marketplace that's working?
It's a good question. I mean, I wish it was simple as like one solution meets everybody's needs. And however, there's no clear answer today. Unfortunately, all the legal grounds of force majeure, or if you're looking for an out, they haven't been proven in court. So ultimately, It's really about the relationship and the communicating with the landlord that has your long-term interest in their project. So a lot of if you look at today, most tenants it's almost like a game of chicken in a way.
Yeah.
They don't know who's going to act first. And unfortunately, it's leading to really poor communication for a lot of situations and letters and threats. But and behind it all, when you get on a personal level with these operators and the landlords, they have the same intentions, they have the same goals, they're all aligned. Sure. Landlords got to make the rent payments, and tenants obviously want to be in the project and keep the real estate. So, force majeure, or there's some other legal angles that they can play, but at the end of the day, until the courts come through, if it's a doctrine of impossibility, or if force majeure doesn't really address the rent side, it just gives them the ability, obviously, to breach an operating covenant. So I would, the most important thing is to try to understand the impact on your P&L for the next period, your best guess of the length of time. And I don't think we're at a V recovery. I think we're really looking at a U recovery here, given what we're seeing in China. You've got today, the 15% of the vehicle traffic as of April 1st was only about 15% of the car traffic was there. About 50%, about 3 million visitors in Beijing, or 3 million visits on their mass transit. However, this week looks like about 90% of the restaurants are up. They're operating about 50% capacity, except for weekends. Seems like this the previous week and on peak times they were doing well. So, in the day, it's trying to figure out when what's your recovery? Are you QSR? Or are you casual dining? Obviously, that's going to make an impact, and then mapping your P&L to a conversation that is going to get you through the next year. Yeah. Because and there's many angles, like everybody's offering the deferment, Paul, as they're like, that's the quick recovery. Like, let me give you 90 days deferment. However, that doesn't do you too well if you're piling that rent onto next year, and you're not, you got maybe less seats. Maybe you're not at full capacity. And even if you are at full capacity next year, then that can you really afford more rent
Yeah,
or
right.
60%, 50% more rent?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the question is when, so I've heard, stories from operators that have tried to extend the lease, basically take months and put it on the back end of leases in terms of their communication with their landlords. One thing that's kind of interesting, because I've had several operators have come back to me on scenarios that they're dealing with of where landlords have come back to them asking for additional elements to help kind of, I guess, soften the position with the landlord's banking program, which, as I understand, in the forbearance side of it, is where the forbearance, all you as a landlord, all you're essentially needing to do is request the forbearance. It essentially is going to get granted. And then being able to, and the forbearance numbers I saw were up to 180 and beyond days. So with those kinds of extensions of forbearance happening at the banking institution level lenders, which roll down to the essentially the landlord and the REITs, what is, I guess, when you look at those, because they're eventually going to have to pass that through to the operator. But I like your point, and that is, even when this does come back, the likelihood is that this has changed everything. So do you think many operators will be in a position where they can renegotiate their lease?
Yeah, I absolutely do. If you look at the landlord's position, they want these great operators, the good operators, to maintain and to be in their center, obviously long term. I mean, that's why they did those deals, and they have a lot of capital tied up with usually these better operators. With the last couple of years, the restaurants were in high demand, and they usually got good economic deals, high TI dollars, and very favorable terms. So, landlords, when you look at amortizing their costs, they probably have an amortization schedule that has got more years on it. So, unless you got something, a tenant that's on this 10-year term, and there's those spaces, and on the other side of it, landlords are looking at, these are the opportunistic spaces that we're going to have most likely. And we are, as a company, talking to them about those tenants that are not likely to come back, and then them finding a way to further invest. So, they know they're better operators. They know the guys that are driving traffic for them in the centers. And they also know the guys that are not so accretive and more willing, not going to take. They're going to take a hard line approach with those operators that they really don't want back, or don't really care in one or the other.
Yeah, I think you are going to see a washout of the industry as a whole. But in reality, the likelihood is that real estate's positioning is going to go down. We're going to see a massive amount of vacancies that are going to be flooding the market. So there's going to be, in the past few years, there's been a very big scarcity of great real estate, especially A locations. So I think we are going to see that just by ones that just can't make it back. So you're going to have that layer that gets hit. I would think that a landlord might not be in a great place, but to negotiate some sort of whether it's re-engineering their lease. Would it be something like an operator that they just default on their lease, providing they can't get forbearance, and then they come back in and renegotiate it later?
Well, I doubt if they're going to go through all that work to then renegotiate at the end. So I think right now the best thing, if a tenant really wants to be in there, and they know they don't have much, it's the leverage is really going to be defined about how much that landlord and really wants the tenant, unfortunately. And I think that is creating that story with that brand that they're accretive, and then ultimately making sure the P&L can support that rent roll or that occupancy cost. And that's where I think a little bit of the magic happens, making sure you're talking to the right person in these companies. Because a lot of them, like Macerich, we were told got 5% of the rental payments in April. Taubman's taking more of a hard line approach with their operators and wanting the rent for they don't put them in default. I just talked to a landlord and big developer in Ohio, and he's definitely trying to work with the governor to make sure that he doesn't lose his property, in fact.
Right.
And because none of these REITs or these landlords or developers that are sitting enough cash to really, pull these, to really sustain these projects, in which ultimately everybody's got to come to the table. So
Yeah, for sure. All right. So scenario is, if the operator wants to stay, the landlord wants to stay, it's in both parties' best interest to figure out something to work. And really at the end, I guess obviously everybody's facing the same scenario on the backside of this in terms of the viability of that property, because the property was built to handle a capacity of X, and now we're going to have an operation that really is a capacity of L, and for much lower. And our whole situation completely changes. So P&L, I think you brought up a good topic there. P&L. If you have a P&L that you as an operator, pre-pandemic, you were holding it, doing great. Your forecast now is basically forecasting in something that no business economic major expert has ever done before, forecasting past a pandemic. So how would you even go about that to forecast and look at where sales could be to where you could make real good financial decisions going forward in the next year?
Well, I mean, we've all, in our businesses, I think everybody is trying to not predict the worst, but we know, we are the lagger in all this coronavirus.
Yep.
So if you look at China, that's why I mentioned it. They're probably about 3 months solid. They started in January, about 200 cases, and now they're reporting very little. The restaurants are not. They're probably 50% at best recovered. So if you just say 3 months to 50%. We're in week 4, so we're probably mid-June, early June to where they are. But I think our consumers are a little more aggressive, a little bit more probably responsive to going back out, maybe a little more extroverted as a society, that we want a social fabric, maybe a little bit more important. So we recover quicker. We're also driving their economy a little bit with production and manufacturing. So so I think we're going to be a little bit shorter than them. But I'm no crystal ball. I can't, I'm not, but I'm hearing many different things. June, obviously this economic package was supposed to take people to June. If it goes much longer, the PPP goes from a great Band-Aid and actually maybe putting some restaurants in a better position with liquidity to totally reverse within, because they're not going to meet their 75% threshold for the most part if we go back in June. It's just not going, their demand's not going to be there.
Yeah, the employment factor would not be in place. I've had several people on the show to talk about that. SaveRestaurants.org, I know they're working on to try to get the stimulus plan kind of rejiggered to a point where it can benefit, the hospitality and the restaurant industry in a better position. All right, so so we've talked about a restaurant that's in a good position. Everything was flying before this happened, and it was great. The landlord loves them. They're going to work it out. What about operators who were on the bubble? This is an operator that he could have fallen either way. One little hit like this pretty much wipes them out. The likelihood is they're not coming back unless they get some huge rent concessions or some sort of reorganization. What do you think happens there? They just go away?
Unfortunately, I just think, this business is a very intensive business, and we got a bunch of scrappy people in this business. But, if there's any forgiving time, it's probably now with the general public and the landlords and the bankruptcy courts and everybody else, that, all the stakeholders. So if you're a marginal restaurant today, I think it may be one or two things. You look at it as an opportunity. If you have lease term left, can you reconcept? Number one, is this a space? Does your lease have market value? And hopefully it does. And if it does have market value, then because it's below market rents today, or it's just a great space, then look at reconcepting it. And there's
Right.
a bunch of license and franchise opportunities to do it quickly. And we can bring those exciting early stage concepts, and you can take advantage of some of the there's some economic benefits out there today with writing off and depreciation
Hmm.
immediately, to kind of to accelerate the cash out of those guys that do invest in reconcept today. So I think ultimately I'd say can you reconcept? Is there value in the lease? And I think landlords are going to work with you on reconcepting. The ability to sublease is probably strict and requires landlord approval, but they're going to work with you given
Sure.
And so I would say if you don't have a reconcept ability or you don't think the space is right, it's a great option to bow out too. I think
Right.
it's
Well, yeah, and bowing out, of course, unless you've got a personal guarantee on the lease, for an independent operator, they're in at least a little bit better position because the business most likely is going to go away. So it's not, probably would never even make it to a bankruptcy court or something of that nature. All right, so let's just, we know where we are. We're in a really bad spot right now. We've got a lot of balls in the air in terms of where this could be in the future. Here is one question that I had come in this week, and that is, everything's great, but business doesn't return. Real estate's falling like a rock in the market,
yeah.
and I'm stuck in a lease paying, $70 a foot. And my operations clearly won't support that now. Where do you think that kind of situation goes for operators?
Well, if everybody is feeling that, if it's like a pandemic, if it's across the board, and the landlords are able to look at their entire portfolio and say this is not a unique situation,
Right.
then I think there's going to be a reset on valuations of their assets, and everybody is going to have to, obviously, especially those landlords are going to have to adjust if they have a lot of debt sitting on their books, and try to refinance or take a longer term position on their assets.
Yeah.
So that's, in the end of the day, if it's unique, because the casual dining obviously is going to be pinched even more, I think. I mean, we had a $27 billion takeout business before. I don't know what it is today, but it's definitely grown by a factor. And by that much, I mean, I think it's going to put more pressure on casual dining. And a lot of these guys are just going to reinvent their business models.
Yeah. Well, and we kind of already saw a bit of a movement toward ghost kitchens, commissary style systems where you didn't need the high rent properties, and you definitely didn't need the facility that typically a casual dining or fine dining operation would use to a capacity that would seat 600 guests or something of that nature. So that in itself is probably going to be a remodel of the entire industry, because we'll see a lot more of that happening. Which means that your flex space, your B and C locations are all of a sudden going to be very interesting. Maybe they're out there, and that's where some of the real estate starts to flow. But I just feel like we could be looking at something like what we've been watching in retail for the past few years, and that is just a slow devastation of a real estate market that may never come back from something like this. And the remaining restaurants that are out there, I just don't know of where they're going to end in terms of these leases and being able to go forward, for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's cool. It's really important. I mean, those restaurants are thriving today. We know they had a great formula, and a lot of them had a culture. We had a labor issue before. We had a shortage of labor.
Right.
And those restaurants that were doing well had a deep culture that those employees really wanted to work and go the extra mile. And ultimately, our supply chain company, we work with 55,000 restaurants, and we have 9 billion of volume. So we really see those restaurants are doing something exceptional, and those differences. And today, we're trying to reposition our clients so they're ready for relaunch, for re-entry into the market. And we put a program together to kind of help them get there or through this for the next year, which is many multifaceted plan. But there's going to be many issues once they do open. even if it's part, we know it's not going to be full capacity, but is your labor cost, that's everybody's focused on labor day. That's great to be focused on labor, because that's where your head is. You just let people go. PPP, you just submitted, you're going to wait for your money, but you should be thinking about COGS, because those are going to go up, and distribution costs are going to go up because the capacity is not at full 100%. We're the second largest avocado contractor in the U.S. You want to make sure you're getting those avocados and the quality, and not getting gouged on pricing. And then you get into the second piece is managing the real estate, and then you got to look at people coming back in the door. I mean, ultimately, are you able to bring your VIP core customers back into your restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
I
think that's it.
The whole industry has changed. I mean, there's people ordering food from their menu and ordering from their phone that never even dreamed about doing that. And
exactly.
So.
Yeah, for sure. Matt, it's been good having you on. I can't wait to maybe have you guys back on when we get past this, because I think we're going to see a lot of creative solutions that start to shake out to help guide the industry and some of the operators that really today are just looking for any kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and hope that when this all ends, we've got at least some sort of a semblance of a plan coming out of this. So great having you on the show today.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. All right. So again, thanks for stopping in. You're listening in on the podcast. Make sure and give us a like. Tell us what you think about the show. Give us some feedback. Those are the best results we love to see. So you can do that over on iTunes or on Spotify. Also, catch us on Google Podcasts now, because we are starting to see a pretty good number of downloads there. So you Android users, thanks for listening in on the show. If you're on YouTube, make sure and smash the bell. Make sure and get more great content from Foodable Network and the Barron Report as we cover this impact on the restaurant industry and what is now an unprecedented and unknown waters as we wage into the future of where restaurants will be. Make sure and stay tuned right here on the Barron Report.